Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to be taking a look now at bioaccumulation, which sounds more complicated than nitrogen cycle, but really is a lot simpler. It's a big word, but compared to the last one with a whole bunch of details and facts and things you have to keep track of, this one's going to be easy. Okay, let's take a look. Biodegradable, a substance that is broken down naturally in the environment. You know that one, right? This is a definition you're familiar with. This includes things like sewage, as we talked about last video, food scraps, dead organisms, and all those kind of things. Non-biodegradable is, of course, the exact opposite. Non meaning doesn't. Substances that are not broken down or are broken down very slowly by natural processes. Examples of these include things like pesticides, such as the very infamous DDT, PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls. Whoa, there's a mouthful, right? Some more chemistry for you. Mercury, glass, and certain types of plastics. Now, why is this important? Once these pollutants, the non-biodegradables, enter an ecosystem, they will remain there forever. Uh-oh. A pollutant becomes a toxin when it adversely affects living organisms. For example, mercury. This means that over time, the organisms will collect these toxins, leading to sickness and death. So this is bioaccumulation. This is where originally I don't have much toxin, but over time as I eat it, quite unintentionally, maybe that toxin is absorbed into the water I'm drinking or the food I'm eating, it starts to build up and then it poisons you and you die. That's ominous. Biomagnification. Uh-oh, it gets worse. When the producers take in the water they require for photosynthesis, they may also absorb a small amount of toxin. These toxins are stored inside of the plants. Now, as we just discussed, over time, the plants might absorb more and more and more and more until eventually they get sick and die from this toxin. But when herbivores eat the plants, they begin to store the toxin in their tissue, the fat tissue. Many producers must be eaten to keep one herbivore alive, so the amount of toxin inside of one herbivore is much higher than that of the individual producers that it consumed. So rather than, one particular organism going from, nothing to slowly, one step at a time, adding more toxins until they're full, what we're saying is that each plant has one of these, but I need to eat a lot, so I eat one of these, and 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 I eat one of, oh, look, I've got all the poison again. Why do I need to eat so much? Well, because we've talked about this before, 10% rule. All that stuff's coming back together. Remember, complex system, many different steps. You got to keep track of them all. So what does this look like? Well, it looks kind of like this. The stored toxins continue to be passed up the food chain. This is biomagnification. Remember, bio means living. So magnify means increase. Accumulate means to collect. So here we got like a very little contamination in these krill, but the fish get quite a bit more. The seal has quite a bit more. And then the polar bear's got lots because it had to eat many seals. Each one of them had a lot of contamination each. Why is this a problem? Because we're like the polar bear. Uh-oh. Remember, we're top predators. This is an issue for us. Here's what it kind of would look like. Each of these fish have only got a little bit of mercury inside them. Right? Let's say that 5 mercury is enough to cause problems. Well, each of these guys have 1. Bob decides he wants some lunch, but that's not a big deal. He decided to bring his friend Sally. The two of them eat some food. Boom. They now have mercury inside of them. But none of them have 5, right? The little fish who get away, they've only got 1 each, and these bigger fish have got 3. So nobody's sick yet. There's just one problem. There was a third person invited to dinner. Uh-oh. This fish eats the other 2, and boom, look at that. Now I got 6. So what happens? This guy gets sick. Toxin concentrations do not generally cause a lot of problems for small organisms because there's usually not that much toxin. But larger organisms end up being exposed to a lot of it over a long time. And more importantly, those larger organisms can include us, which, I don't know about you, but I don't want to get poisoned. Thank you very much. Why is this happening? What's going on? Well, right, there's it is an explanation very quickly. and they build up to dangerous levels. Each trophic level, the amount of toxin inside the organism increases. This process is known as biomagnification or bioaccumulation. Eventually, the levels of toxin become high enough inside the secondary or tertiary consumers that their health is affected. They may be poisoned and die, or weakened and more susceptible to disease or predators, which just compounds the problem. Because if a predator can, grab onto somebody who's sick because of the poisoning, well, then they get poisoned too. This also affects us in the form of mercury and other diseases caused by toxins. Minamata disease is a famous one of this, caused by mercury, usually from things like mining or manufacturing. Mercury is a natural material that is used in certain kinds of processes, or conversely, it is a material that is a byproduct of a bunch of processes. And once it gets released, it doesn't disappear, it just moves around. The problem is when it moves around into us. Once it gets into the aquatic food chain, it can build its way up towards high level fish, right? The really big fish like tuna, salmon. Ugh. What does this mean is that then we eat the fish and we get sick. Mercury poisoning, which is what Minamata disease ends up being, mercury poisoning is kind of a big deal. When I first started off in chemistry, one of the professors that I worked with had a very simple explanation. And he said, first thing I did when I opened a lab was I bought myself a flask of mercury because it's incredibly important for chemistry. And the second thing that I did was make sure that anybody working for me knew exactly how dangerous mercury was. So he gave me a book and told me to read it and talked about mercury poisoning. Mercury, it damages the nervous system. Now, this isn't quite biology, but we are in ecology, so let's talk about this a bit. The nervous system is what connects your brain to the rest of your body, and it's what allows you to control and move. So when you start to get nerve damage, it starts to affect your ability to control parts of your body. The first major symptom of mercury poisoning is the shakes. Now everyone freaks out and they're like, oh, I have had my hands shake once before. Do I have mercury poisoning? No, you probably don't. That's the first symptom, from what I remember anyway. It doesn't mean it's the only symptom, and it has to be persistent. In the old days, electricity, a lot of electrical junction boxes had pools of mercury as part of their designs, and the men who used to work on them used to, as a result of inhaling mercury vapor from the incredibly hot mercury from the electricity, would start to develop shakes in their writing. So their writing, when they're holding their pen, would end up, shaking as they're trying to write. So their letters would be all wonky and you couldn't really track it. But as a result, they were able to track this change over the decades that these people were working because the poisoning was slow and insidious. That's not the most famous example. The most famous example of this is usually, well, if I ask how many people have read or seen Alice in Wonderland. It's a pretty famous book, well, in England anyway. So not everybody has seen it, especially if they're not from the English-speaking world. But in Alice in Wonderland, the titular Alice ends up going to Wonderland, and one of the characters that she meets early in the book is the Mad Hatter. And the Mad Hatter is quite mad. Not angry, but crazy. And more importantly, he has a hat. This was a take on a common refrain from back in the day. You see, a long time ago, it was very fashionable to have a fancy top hat. And the top hat is made of fur, felt specifically. But the process of making felt involves, or at least it did, mercury in order to make it nice and fuzzy and stiff and all these other things that people wanted in their hats. So a haberdasher, or a hatter, a person who made hats, spent a lot of time being exposed to mercury. And over time, their profession would poison them. Mad as a hatter became a phrase in the common language of English. If someone is as mad as a hatter, that means that they're pretty crazy. It's not used as much anymore because, well, first of all, most hatters aren't mad anymore. Probably. And second of all, because we don't tend to make things out of fur anymore, and we don't use mercury to do it when we do. But that's sort of the idea. The neurological damage originally causes things like shakes, hard time controlling parts of the body, but eventually it starts to affect the mind, hence the mad as a hatter. You start to hallucinate, see things, hear things, be unable to control yourself. It messes with your brain. It literally damages the way your brain functions. So it's a big problem. Minamata disease was discovered in Japan because there happened to be a bunch of factories and things that were putting a lot of mercury in the water, and Japan's an island, and sushi is a thing, so people would eat a lot of fish, and those people were getting sick, very sick. So that's why it recommends that you avoid eating too much fish. Too much is a bit subjective. It kind of depends where you are, where the fish came from, mercury levels, etc., etc. It also depends where the fish came from in the food chain. If you take something that's really small down here, like the shrimp and such here, well, they don't have much mercury in them at all anyway. And again, to stress, they might not have mercury. Not like every fish is like poisoned with mercury, but if you eat enough stuff, which you probably will because you're a top predator and we need to eat a lot, if you eat enough stuff, you might have a problem. This is why government agencies and things try to keep track of this stuff, and why, since discovering this, we try to make sure that we, clean up our act. Again, most of the problems that humans cause are not by malice, but by ignorance. We don't sit down and go, ha ha, how to poison people today. Nobody does that, I hope. What mostly happens is people go, oh, I didn't know that was a problem. My bad, I'll fix it. I mean, that's the ideal case. Often it goes, I didn't know that was a problem. Can someone else fix it? Because I don't want to be responsible for this. A lot of people try to hide. What can I say? Heck, there's a life lesson for you. The difference between a child and an adult. A child will hide their mistakes. An adult will fix them. Anyway, here's some videos you can take a look at. This is a cool one of mercury and gold, and you can see how they sort of react and behave. Mercury by itself used to be used in thermometers and things. It's very effective. It's a liquid, right, at room temperature. And, well, it's a liquid even to very cold temperatures. The way that it behaves is pretty neat. This video here isn't directly related to any kind of bioaccumulation, but it does show how mercury can complex and add and do chemistry with things in a really neat way. I mean, it's just kind of cool, right? Mercury by itself doesn't usually cause trouble with organic tissue. It needs to be combined with carbon first so it can be absorbed by our bodies more easily. But that's okay because, as you're going to see if you take a look at this video, mercury's very good at that. Yay! I know. Anyway, take a look at the videos, try some practice, and next time we're going to start taking a look at population growth. I'll see you then.